been sitting here trying to think of a clever opening for like 5 minutes. I'm giving up at this point. House of the Dragon, episode 5, I think is what we're up to. So I'd say this is the first one that I have more than just nitpicky issues with. This one, it's not awful, but I do think it is, for my taste and why I have previously liked Game of Thrones and why I was enjoying this series. This is the weakest one of the season so far. Now, given its placement about mid-season, that's not super uncommon, given that this is usually the point at which pieces are just being moved about to get them in place for whatever's coming next. So, like, it's not necessarily any kind of portent of doom, but it's got stuff I didn't cared for, and then reminded me of some of the stuff that I have never cared for about Game of Thrones as a setting. So before I get into this, I here's something I really need some of the people in my comment section to get. I haven't read the works this is based on, and anything that I say I wish they hadn't done this, or I would rather they didn't do that, do not come back at me with, well, they have to, it was in the source material. Extrapolate that as me criticizing the source material then, because my criticism will hold either way. All right? So I'm not here to debate what they could or couldn't change from the original material. I'm just here to talk about what I feel about what I've seen. Okay? Okay. I don't mean to be argumentative about that, but it's like it's an argument that is meaningless to me. It has no meaning to me as a critic watching this show. All right? Hey. Because, like, people have brought that up, like, when I've said the time jumps aren't quite working narratively. But, okay, I need to get off that. All right. So, the first thing that happened that wasn't quite landing right for me was that there was not everything, but there was a fair amount of stuff that goes on in this episode that hinges on, honestly, almost like rom-com level miscommunication stuff. I think the best example of that being when the Queen was talking to the primary guard, the personal guard for the princess. I know some of these names, but like my brain is making me second guess them, so I'm skipping most of them. But she says, I've heard these things about the princess, and he assumes that she means him sleeping with her, not realizing she's talking about the idea that Damon did. And he's just like, and he just blurts forth all this stuff. And it's just this whole situation where it's just like, I get it. It's not out of character for him to, given him feeling like he's failed his sense of duty, to just jump at the chance to unburden himself. Like, I get why he does it. I just don't like it. I don't like that kind of miscommunication based storytelling. It's uncomfortable for me. It's not to the same end as like cringe humor, but it gives me that same feeling in my gut of like, if you understood what was actually being asked of you, and like it wasn't even a trick she played on him, he just was wrong about what he thought was being asked about, and he just did something that he wouldn't have done otherwise. It just gives me that feeling that cringe type stuff does. So I didn't enjoy that at all. And that's very much a personal preference thing. But it also just feels like kind of a, I don't know, it feels like a weak device to hinge certain characters finding out stuff they didn't otherwise know, is for someone to accidentally blurt it out based off just the wording of a question asked. Like, it's I suppose it's not the worst thing in the world, but like, it feels a little contrived. That might be me reaching for reasons for it to be bad other than just my own gut reaction to that type of narrative device. And so like that might not even be accurate, but that's just kind of where I'm at with it. And it's not the only instance in the episode, but it is the big prominent one. And then, okay, so we set up the princess meeting this guy who she is now betrothed to. And the show spends 3 scenes in a row establishing and then reestablishing with less and less subtlety that this guy betrothed to The princess is gay. And every scene, it made me both more annoyed and more nervous. Because when it started, I'm like, when it's her and him walking along the beach, it was actually kind of like, this is almost kind of sweet. It's like neither of them really wants this for whatever reason. She doesn't really want to get married at all, and he is gay. But in the way of their talking, they come to an understanding that, like, this is a political arrangement. And maybe we can just let each other be who we are and move forward on that basis. And it was kind of sweet and it was kind of nice. And then you cut back to the castle, and the guy's parents talk about, without coming out and saying it, but talking about how he's not into women. And then and so like the sweetness in the way it was handled before is like gone. It's handled much more bluntly, just without saying like a specific word that would mean gay. And then you immediately show him with his lover, his male lover. And that was the point at which, okay, like, any idea that this is just like an aspect of his character, this is just something that he is in addition to something else, was gone. I'm like, they are making such a strong point of this that, first of all, it minimizes him as a character, because instead of establishing literally anything else about him, they spend 3 scenes in a row establishing and reestablishing and re-reestablishing that he is gay. So when people talk about characters or even real life people like basing their entire personality around the idea that they're gay, like, often that is just thrown out as nonsense. But this is actually kind of an example of that, where with multiple scenes that could have established any number of other things about him, they just keep reestablishing over and over again that he's gay. And on the third go was also the point that I put my head in my hands and went, so help me, if one of these two dies, either the guy betrothed to the princess or his lover dies the same episode, first of all, I'm calling it. Second of all, I'm going to be really irritated. Guess what happened? And that was kind of the thing where I hinted at before, where I've said issues that I've had with Game of Thrones prior to this. Because I understand the setting. I understand that in the setting of Westeros, as George R.R. Martin decided to build it, that homosexuality is largely not accepted. There are certain nobles who maybe kind of get away with it because they do it behind closed doors and they have a certain amount of power. But like it's not an accepted thing. You cannot be openly gay. And that there are people who will not only look down on you, but may want you dead because of it. I accept that as a aspect of this world. I don't love that it's an aspect of this world, but that's how he built the world. I have to be able to roll with that because that's the world this whole thing is set in. Fine. But at a certain point, I don't want you to introduce any more gay characters when all that ever happens to them in this setting is that they die, or their lovers die, or they both die, and they suffer. Like, after the second time the main show did this kind of thing, I'm like, okay, you do not need to do this anymore, like, ever again, because you've made the point. We get it. So unless you are going to introduce a character who can be much more than just another gay character who is not going to live very long, then just please don't. And as I said, this character, and his lover even more so, because his lover exists only framed as his lover. So as much as I already complained about this guy who's betrothed to the princess being defined 3 scenes in a row with increasing amounts of unsubtleness as being gay, the situation with his lover is even worse because he's introduced immediately and they don't even have to establish it. You just see them in a scene together. Oh, that guy. That's the gay lover. And that is who ultimately is going to die violently, viciously, brutally by the end of the episode. And I didn't need to see this. I didn't need it here. I didn't need to see this. This is all well-established stuff about this world. And before you try and be like, well, like it's been established in Game of Thrones, but this is a prequel. Maybe there's new viewers. Like, are there really? Are there really? Is there anyone who jumped on this who hadn't at least watched a good chunk of Game of Thrones? I'm not sure I buy that very much at all. And it just feels like the worst version of bury your gays that still goes on. Here's a character. They're gay. Did we mention they're gay? They're super gay. Here's their gay partner. And then one of them is dead. And before anybody, makes an argument of me, well, like, it's not completely bury your gays because one of them is still alive. Like, you still killed half the queer population of this show. At least that we're aware of. You introduced 2 and you killed 50% in the same episode, which also now defines the remaining one, who has already been overly defined by the fact that he's gay. It leaves him to be defined by loss and mourning and pain, which is the other thing that this kind of presentation does. It associates being anything other than heterosexual with being in pain and with suffering, which is not good, because that's a thing that gets hammered on a lot. And again, I'm sure some people will say, like, well, almost everybody in this show is suffering. Like, yes, lots of characters are going through a lot of crap. No doubt whatsoever. But I could at least find a handful of straight characters who seem to be doing all right at the moment. When you've only got 2 gay characters and you put them through the ringer like this and leave one of them dead. I've spent more time talking about this than I wanted to, but I feel like it's been so long since I've talked about bury your gays as a trope. Like years ago, I did a full breakdown on it there. You can check that out on the main Council of Geeks channel. It's been so long since I talked about it that I feel like I need to reestablish some of the stuff I've already gone over. So, other than that, Matt Smith is still giving a real good performance. There's a good menace to him. I feel like they overplayed the illness with the king. Like, established that it keeps getting worse, but like having him break into coughing fits like every single scene. Like, no, we got it. We got it. We get it. The characters around him get it. Everyone who needs to get it got it. You can back off a little bit, which makes it a little bit like the reestablishing of the gay thing. Now that I think about it, yeah, like the acting's fine. It's shot well enough. I'm really not caring too much for the queen as a person. Like, as a character, she's fine. She works for the narrative, and it's showing how playing these political games and having to take into consideration all these various political aspects of things as her father, who's no longer the hand, lays out very plainly for her, like what that does to a person. That's a good story. But it does make me not like her as a person. And not liking her as a person is not the same as not liking her as a character. There's a big, big difference. She's working fine as a character. And like, a lot of stuff's working fine, but this is one of those cases where this did a thing that hits a nerve with me. 'Cause I've talked about for a long time why this stuff is a problem in general and why it bothers me in particular. So it is one of those things where, like, I know I don't have the cultural impact that, well, I put my word out on it, so it should stop now. I am not that egotistical. But at the same time, you can't help but feel like on a kind of a personal level that once you've said your piece about a thing, to encounter that thing again feels worse. Even though it's not directed at you, it's not aimed at you. I mean, other than like being part of a fandom or an audience, but like it's not being done to annoy you. But once you're more aware of it, as I become, when I do research to be able to talk about it, like I did some years ago, yeah, it makes me less able to let it slide. And the episode wasn't amazing prior to that, but that honestly does drag it down a lot. And maybe not nearly as much for some people. Maybe some people don't care at all. And I don't think that makes you a bad person if what happened to the gay characters doesn't bother you. I'm just here to explain as to why it bugged the ever-loving hell out of me. So, you don't have to get upset about this. You're not obligated, but I kind of am. And it's my channel, so I'm going to explain why. There we go. House of the Dragon, what'd you think about this episode? Whatever your thoughts are, given that I have evoked things like bury your gaze and whatever, I imagine there will be some pushback. Do it politely. I don't have a problem with comments that disagree with me. Just don't be a jerk. It's a very simple rule. And if you can do that, I do want to hear from you, even if you do disagree with me. Patreon's how you can support me and ensure that I'm able to continue to do this. But even if you're not able to do that, like, share, subscribe, they help as well. Or, you know, you don't even have to do that if you aren't up for it, because try and take a relaxed attitude around here so you can just come on back next time you need a break. Time to give my thanks to my highest supporting patrons. That would include Robin Moore, Zubin Lutfullah, Tarak, the thing that goes doink in the anime, Oliver B., Melinda Walters, Emu Delkey, Theotha Boyd, Becky Sparks, Fernabi Likes the Poodle, Zach, Idolin, Tracy Scrabbit, Angry Casperl, Adam RDL Taylor, Shane Ross, Shaylee Gourlay, Brendan LaRose, and TT. If you want your name said while these guys try and distract me, consider looking at the rewards on my Patreon.